Hi, I'm Mark. The aim of this tutorial is to show you how you can save a lot of render time using a very basic render pass. My 3D app of choice is LightWave 3D, so I touch upon some of the interchange tools there, but if you're an After Effects and Element 3D user, then hopefully there should be plenty of interest here too. There's chapter points in the description below to help you jump about. To begin with, we'll take a little tour of the scene. We have a ground plane which simply acts as a shadow catcher, a pair of glasses and lenses which is parented to the glasses. A main light is casting shadows from the glasses to the ground. In terms of animation, a really simple setup where glasses just fall to the ground and bounce a couple of times. Bullet was used for this, and after everybody was happy with the way it bounced, it was baked out to keyframes. Rebel Hill's animation toolbox did the baking in world coordinates, start and end points. Bake motion, that was it, job done. It's not important in this example, but the reason we're at this angle is originally we were lined up to a background plate. There was also an environment light which I've turned off for this, which is why we've got quite heavy shadows, but we will persist. As you can see, I was using some refractions in my example, but for this I'm going to show a way of doing that in post, so we are going to render them without refraction, which is going to turn the lenses off. So let's set up our outputs with a buffer for the glasses. We have lots of lovely stuff to choose from out of these buffers, but for this I'm going to keep it really simple, relying on just a final render with an alpha, separated by a custom buffer. So let's create that buffer now. Bringing up our surface editor, you will see the glasses is made up of one surface. That makes life a little easier. What would make life even more easier is if you had OD Toolkit, where you could go to the Buffers tab and click on Per Surface. Now just by doing that, it's automatically created buffers for us. In case you don't have OD Toolkit, let's start afresh. Bring up your render properties, under the Buffers tab, Edit, Create Custom. Let's just call this Custom. OK that. Close that down, over to our glasses surface. Now you see OD Toolkit has created these already for us. There's the custom one that I've brilliantly spelt just a second ago. That's how OD Toolkit does it. Just wire ray weight into the custom buffer. We can see exactly what's going on. OD Toolkit has done exactly what we need there, so we'll just remove the custom one from the list and also the lens we won't be needing. Let's set up the outputs, jump into the output, we want a final render tab. Check you're happy with these settings. This will include the alpha channel, so a 32-bit PNG is what I like to use here, and also the alpha channel I like to use straight, so the RGBA colours aren't mixed up with any background colours around the edges. Custom buffer, we need to turn that on. Again, same sort of setup, render to where you need it to render. And also, these don't contain alphas, they'll be just black and white images, so a PNG 24 will be good for that. If you're using a background plate with shadow catcher, sometimes I find using background color will help you out, but check your buffers before you do that. So send it off to your F10 or render farm, however it is you do it. The model's up next, as Element will need something to play with. Now this model is subpatched, which Element will not like. Copy that to a new object and paste. Let's not bore you with this. Select the front. Let's just freeze it. And the side pieces, although sub D, they don't need to be sub D. So there we go. So that's all now a solid hard surface mesh. So just before export, while you were out playing, I did run some band glue over it just to reduce the polygon count. So that should help speed things along in Element. I also included the lenses as they're a separate surface and pretty easy to turn off should we not need them. Let's export it for Element. Click O on the keyboard to get up your general options. OBJ tab. Everything is by default. The only important setting to note is the export scale is 4000%. Don't ask me why, but that's the one that works. Now I strongly recommend you saving any OBJs that you're going to use in Element into your Video Copilot install directory. If you need to share models about, rather than relinking to random places in hard drives, this is the first place it will look. So this will potentially save you a ton of headaches further down a chain. So let's create a folder called glasses. Glasses to AE demo low res, that's fine. Save that. We should be good to go. So we've at last made it to After Effects. I've brought in our rendered sequences, glasses, and our glasses matte. Let's start by adding a background color. Now our render started at frame 15, so I've moved it to frame 15 so we marry up with our timeline in layout. We'll begin by separating the glasses and the shadow. So let's select our glasses and rename that. Let's just call it glasses. Let's go for a set matte. Point it to our glasses matte. Don't want alpha channel, we want luminance. Okay, that's nice. That's our glasses separated. Now let's go for the shadow. So let's just duplicate that one up, move it underneath, LightWave shadows, and invert that matte. So now we have glasses and we have a shadow. Reduce the opacity, do what we need, and on the glasses we could, let's just add curves, colorizing the glasses as we see fit. So that's a good first step, but as you can see we're losing some contact shadows by doing this. Our next step is to use Element to do this additional shading for us. Let's start by grabbing a few pieces from LightWave first. So here we are. Let's firstly select the camera, go to the In-Out tab and select Send to AE. There we go. That was pretty straightforward. Now we need to grab the glasses. We need basically any object with a moving pivot point, and as you can see we got a lot going on here in terms of keyframes. So let's select the glasses, which we are, send to AE. There's a slightly weird thing when sending data from LightWave to After Effects, in that you may need to extend the timeline and then try sending it through. So there you go, that went through, bit of a weird one, but that's what we have. Back in After Effects, create a new solid. Let's call this E3D, apply element. In the scene setup, we're going to search for our model that we saved earlier. Glasses, this is our glasses. Double click on that. Now we're going to need two things. First is the force alignment. We need from model. So select that. We're going to leave that off for now. Okay, that. There's the glasses. Complete with lenses. Now the second thing we need to remember is normalize size. That needs to be, it needs to be off. It needs to get the scaling from the actual model. Let's turn the lenses off for now because we're not going to need those. Second thing we need to do is create a ground plane. Now we may need this to catch some shadows later on or some other stuff. So we're going to make that nice and big. Next thing to do is we're going to separate these out into separate groups. Our ground plane doesn't move, there's no animation on that, so we're going to put that in group 2. Our glasses do have animation on it, so that needs to be in a separate group, so we'll keep that in group 1. But we don't need that folder, so we'll just delete that. Let's make them black. Okay, that's nice. Glasses in group 1, plane which doesn't move in group 2, so let's OK that. We have some repositioning to do because everything's in LightWave world and not After Effects world. So in group 2, which is our ground plane, we need to move the position to 0, 0, 0, X, Y, Z, because we know in LightWave that's where our ground plane sits. We're going to do something slightly different for the glasses. First we're going to do is we're going to create group null. So let's create that and call that E3D glasses control. But where is it? Let's press F11. You'll see it's sort of, again in After Effects default world of 96540. We want that to be over here. How do we do that? Well, we have our null here sent in from LightWave with all our animations. So we've got a control from there. With our finger on the shift key, we'll take the pick wick, parent it to the LightWave null. And what you should see is we now have a pair of glasses. Let's move this underneath our glasses render so we can see the alignment. And as you can see, it's not quite aligned. And the reason for that is For some reason, when you send data through to After Effects, it doesn't take the scaling into consideration, so we've got to do that manually. One thing to remember, not entirely applicable here, but 1 meter in LightWave is equivalent to 100 pixels in After Effects. Like I say, it doesn't really help us out too much here. We could apply that scaling to either the source null from LightWave, but I'm going to apply it to the element here. So I just copied and pasted that. I'm just going to nudge that a couple of decimal places to the right. Okay, so now we have, let's knock the opacity of the glasses down. In fact, let's turn them off. So we now have the Element 3D glasses and the LightWave shadows all in perfect sync. That's our rigging complete, so let's have a quick tidy up. This E3D layer I'm just going to use as a basis for the other effects, if you like. So I'll be turning that off and just coming back to that each time to duplicate. So we've got a fresh start. Our control nulls, let's lock those and hide them. Same with the matte. And our camera's not going to be moving, but we'll lock it. Last bit of prep work, I want my Element 3D glasses, just a layer just of the glasses. Duplicate up the E3D layer, call it glasses, go into the scene, plane model, so let's just remove it. Okay, that. So that could come in handy for reference later. Ambient occlusion. There's a couple of approaches here. Let's duplicate our base setup, call it ambient occlusion, turn it on. Okay, the first thing we could do is we could go into scene setup with our plane material selected. Down in the advanced tab we could matte shadow, and we could do exactly the same for the glasses. Matte shadow. Next step is actually to turn it on. So we go to render settings, ambient occlusion, and we tick that. So as you can see, we've got a nice contact shadow. Select our quality. We'll go for fastest now just to speed things up. So let's move it to the top of the stack and adjust accordingly. So that's one approach. The only downside to this is when you come back to it and open the scene, everything is invisible. You can't tell what's going on. So my preference is this second approach. Let's start fresh, duplicate our base scene. Okay, solo that. Obviously the first thing to do, as we mentioned, is turn it on. We'll keep it fast. And the second step, under output, show ambient occlusion. So we're just looking at the ambient occlusion buffer. Now the reason I like this is making it black and white is slightly easier to adjust curves or levels. Let's try levels so we can tighten it up, do what we need to. Let's move it to the top of the stack, multiply it over the top and tweak accordingly there. Let's turn the shadows off. Obviously we've got quite low settings there. Reflections next. We can get some incredible results with this. Let's duplicate our base layer and go into the scene setup. To see this, we need the glasses and the plane model to be in the same group. So we're going to create a new folder and drag both of those into there. So there they are. We're going to separate that out later, but to see this setup, they need to be seen together. Time to add reflections to our ground plane. I have pro shaders that I got when I bought Element, and if we look in the metals, they've got some lovely metals in here, but for now let's try this metal here. I think that will be quite nice. We can't see any reflections at the moment, we've got to turn them on. So with the plane model, scroll down to reflect mode, under mode, mirror surface. Let's go to the metal texture, the glossiness. Let's knock the glossiness down a little bit so we can see that there. Nice thing about this as well is we can adjust the UV spacing, so let's take it down a little bit. Let's just OK this to see what we have, remembering to turn the layer on. Okay, so we've got nice reflections, but we can see the ground plane, and we'll also see a little bit probably of the glasses, which we don't need to see. Let's turn those off. Under the ground plane, similar to the matte shadow, but rather than that we're going to matte reflection. That'll take our ground plane off and just leave us with the reflections. Now we can't just turn the glasses off because the reflections disappear, but what we can do is under the advanced tab is visible to camera, we can untick that so we're left just with the reflection. We're all set up, ready to go. Now we've got to remember to move everything back into their relevant groups. Take it all out the folder. Plane was group 2, glasses was group 1, delete the folder. OK to that. I mean, that's looking really nice straight away. Let's turn off the LightWave shadows, and again we can affect accordingly. Let's add some curves. In fact, it's worth considering to save ourselves a bit of rendering time whether if we go this route we actually need to render our ground plane with shadows, further saving us some render time, which is the aim. It's time to fake some refraction. Starting with our base E3D layer, let's duplicate that, we'll call this lenses, as that's what we'll be refracting. So open the scene interface, delete the ground plane, we won't need that. Lens, let's turn the lens on, and the glasses we need to see because there's a little bit of overlap. As shown earlier, we're going to matte shadow. So they are now just effectively clipping the lenses. Here are our lenses, all nicely soloed on an alpha. Okay, so let's hide those because we're not going to need those for now. Create a new solid, refraction matte. So we're going to be using a displacement map on these, and we need a couple of effects. Set matte, let's point that straight to our lenses, and we want that after element. So we've got a nice hole cut into our layer here. Now, as mentioned, I'm using a displacement map, and we want this to be at 50% brightness, which basically means no displacement. The next step we're going to make is we're going to blur that. Let's just add a fast blur here. Okay, there. This will be the area of our refraction. So no refraction, and where it's soft, that's plenty of refraction. But if you notice, we're going over the edges of our frames here, so we're going to need to crop that out, and we do that with another set matte. And again, let's point it to our lenses. We have a nicely cropped pair of lenses. Let's turn that off and hide it. And the final piece of this puzzle will be the actual distortion. Let's create an adjustment layer, Command Option Y. Let's add the displacement map, and point it to this refraction matte that we've just created. And we want after the effects have been applied. Okay, now nothing happens to begin with. We need to, because we're using alphas, we need to select alpha on the red and the green, and you will see things are moving. So we're nearly there. We just need to crop out all of this and keep it to within our lenses. What we're going to do is we're going to go to our element 3D lenses, move it to the top, and use that as an alpha matte for our distortion. So without distortion, and have slightly more sensible settings so we don't go too far. And again, we can blur the edges depending on the fall off and the amount of effect that needs to have. The only fly in the ointment here is at the top of the screen. You see where we can see the alpha underneath the image. So because we're in motion here, a little cheat would probably be just to fade it in, because we could bury that ultimately with a bit of motion blur. Let's move the matte out of the way and hide it. While we're here, we could also, on the adjustment layer, perhaps a little bit of blur, soften it slightly, not too much, just take a bit of the edge off, add a bit of a tint. Ooh. So if we're going to add a tint, let's copy that value. It may be nice to reflect that in the reflections. So turn the lenses on. You've got a right mouse click to paste here. We'll get our values there. There's a force opacity which could come in useful. Let's just take it down so it's not right in our faces. And let's remember to turn off visible to camera, same as the others, as I forgot, which is why I've had to go back and re-record this bit. Lovely, so now we've got a little bit of reflection. So I could bore you to tears and go on and on with this, but let's just show a couple of other things we could do. So the glasses, let's say we wanted to add something to our scene. We've got a nice utility function in Element, so we can, let's say we wanted to add a graphic at this point here. We select our location and we generate a null. And there we go, we got a null at that point. Now if I want to take that further and perhaps do something in 3D with some nice shading, I quite simply can go to the export, send selected layers to LightWave. And if we pop over to layout, there's our null that's just gone through, so we can parent that, do whatever we want. Or perhaps we just needed to amend its position, we could just do that. Send to AE, and our point is amended. Same is true of lighting, just have a simple distant light here. Send to AE. Let's duplicate our base. Okay, let's quickly, similar to the other approaches, we only want to see the shadow, not the plane, so we'll matte shadow. Glasses, same, matte shadow, okay that. Move it below our renders. The only thing to remember is to make sure cast shadows is clicked on. Back to our shadows layer, render settings, shadows, enable. Let's remove the keyframes from the light that's just come through from LightWave. So parallel lights I find a little bit weird. Some strange cutting off, as you can see, some strange behaviours here. And they do marry up with LightWave shadows, which is good to see. So again, that could be another option that will speed up workflow. We could also change this to a spotlight. Perhaps point of interest can be our origin, just for starters. And then we can move the position of our spotlight around to suit. So with a bit of fiddling, we could get some nice soft shadows playing with this shadow darkness and diffusion. And just as a final word at the end of all of this, the art director comes in. He says, "We love what you've done, Mark. Thank you very much. How have you managed to do it so quickly?" "Well, I use this program called LightWave." "Oh, really? I've never heard of that. Blah, 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 blah." Anyway, the upshot is we need to change the camera angle. Well, that's not as painful to do as we might think. Let's turn off all the LightWave stuff. And let's turn on the element stuff. So the first thing I do is duplicate up the camera and remove the keyframes. Let's call it new camera. Now what I might also do, just to make it slightly easier to control, is turn it into a 2-node camera and zero out the rotations. So let's say everybody's happy with that. New camera selected. Export, send to LightWave. So we have no setting up to do, just hit F10. And while that's rendering in the background, continue working. We'll go and have a cup of tea. Hope you found this useful.